The story of Adam and Eve in the garden, it's probably one of the most famous stories in the entire world, but we usually think of it as this one single dramatic moment. One bad choice, one bite of a forbidden fruit. We're going to dive deep into this because when you actually look at the source material, it reveals something way more complex. It's really a sophisticated psychological process, a slow, gradual surrender that has kind of echoed through human history ever since. So, let's start with that big question. Was it really just a single bite? Was this whole fall of humanity just a clumsy accident, a little slip-up? Or was it actually the final step in a much longer, more calculated sequence of events? That's what we're going to unpack today by really breaking down the anatomy of this ancient story. You see, this wasn't just one catastrophic mistake. It was more like a series of smaller choices that created this domino effect. So let's unpack that, this gradual process of surrender. What we're about to see is that this story isn't really about a momentary lapse in judgment at all. It's more like a blueprint for temptation itself. It's a breakdown of a slow, strategic process with some very clear and, frankly, deliberate stages. Yeah, the source material actually lays out this fascinating 6-step framework for surrender. It's amazing how a series of seemingly small choices could lead to such a massive, monumental outcome. So here's our roadmap for how it all goes down. First, you inject a little doubt. Then you start to distort the rules. From there, it escalates to directly accusing God. Then it gets really subtle. You mix truth with lies. That leads to a claim of personal autonomy. And the final step, you get others involved. Let's break down each one. Okay, so the very first move here is just a masterclass in subtlety. The serpent doesn't kick things off with a lie or some big command. No, it starts with a simple question. Did God really say? See, that's not a direct challenge. It's an insinuation, and it's designed to plant this tiny seed of doubt about God's goodness, about his intentions. Maybe he's holding something back. And now pay close attention to Eve's response here. God's command was actually very simple. You must not eat. But listen to her retelling. She adds, and you must not touch it. She actually sharpens the prohibition, making the rules sound even stricter than it really was. So why would she add that little detail? Well, the source suggests this probably isn't just a simple mistake. It might actually betray this underlying irritation she's feeling, this little resentment that God's rule is, a bit too restrictive. By exaggerating the rule, she makes it seem more severe, and that helps justify her own growing frustration. This right here is the first real crack in the foundation. Okay, so that seed of doubt has been planted, and now the serpent makes its big move. It escalates from that subtle insinuation to a direct accusation. God said you will die. The serpent says you will not surely die. This is a flat-out direct attack on God's integrity, on his truthfulness. And this next part brilliantly illustrates the most powerful tool in the serpent's arsenal, the half-truth. I mean, look at this breakdown. Did he say their eyes would be opened? Yep. And were they? Yes. The text later confirms they were. Did he say they'd be like God? Well, in a sense, yeah, in knowing good and evil. But here's the deceptive twist. These outcomes weren't the glorious liberation the serpent was implying. They were a burden. They were a usurpation of a role that was never theirs to take. So here's the crucial takeaway from that. The most effective deceptions, they aren't always just pure outright fabrications. So often, they are truths, but they're meticulously twisted to serve a destructive agenda. And it's that mixture of truth and falsehood that makes the whole argument so compelling and so hard to resist. Now let's see how this whole temptation builds internally. The text says Eve saw the fruit was good for food, it was pleasing to the eye, and it was desirable for gaining wisdom. What's absolutely fascinating is how this breakdown maps perfectly onto a framework of human desire that we find elsewhere in the Bible: the sensual, the aesthetic, and the intellectual. This shows us it's not just one woman's choice. It's practically a blueprint for how temptation works on our deepest levels. And this is the real moment of internal surrender. Fueled by the serpent's logic and her own analysis of the situation, she makes a decision. She claims autonomy. She decides that she will be the one to determine what's good and what's evil. The physical act hasn't even happened yet, but the core violation, setting herself up as the ultimate authority, that's already taken place right here in her mind. So the final step is to take that private decision and make it public. She eats, and then she also gave some to her husband, and he ate it. The transgression spreads through their relationship, and with Adam's participation, the whole process of surrender is now complete. So that whole process was a slow burn, right? It was this buildup of doubt and reasoning. The result, however, it was immediate, it was jarring, and it was completely unexpected. The very next sentence after they eat is this: "The eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked." The serpent was right. Their eyes were opened, but not to glory or wisdom or power. They were open to this new, painful awareness of themselves and of each other. What they experienced in that moment was shame. And the source defines shame really simply. It's a feeling that arises directly from a consciousness of guilt. It's like an emotional reflex that's triggered by the new reality of what they've done. But shame is actually pretty complex. It's a sign that their relationship, which was once pure, is now marred. It's distorted. It points to this new alienation between people. And it's so critical to get this. This isn't about sexuality becoming sinful. It's about its potential for distortion. But here's the real paradox. While shame is a really painful result of guilt, the source also calls it a kind of blessing, like a protective barrier against even more moral danger in a now fallen world. So, why does this ancient story still feel so immediate, so relevant to us today? Well, it's because it reveals a deeply human pattern that totally transcends its original context. What this story gives us, then, is a timeless blueprint. It shows us that the path to transgression is almost never a giant leap. It's a gradual process. It starts with a simple question, then it distorts the rules to justify resentment, and finally, it appeals directly to our most fundamental human desires. Which really leaves us with a final thought. This psychological drama, it was recorded thousands of years ago. It describes a slow, 6-step surrender to temptation, followed by the sudden, gut-punching impact of shame. The question for us is, when you look at the world around you, or maybe even just your own life, is this ancient pattern of surrender still playing out today?